Erik Weaver. If you missed it before, he did a little talk before on AI, a foundational talk, and now he's going to talk about AI in animation. And Erik runs virtual and adaptive production at the Entertainment Technology Center at USC. Thank you, Erik. I will hold the microphone.
I have to say that my opinion on students and working with students is absolutely, you have to train them for the future. Let's get them ready as much as we possibly can, because the world is changing and they understand it and they adapt to it, as opposed to sometimes it's a little harder for us. But that's my opinion. Okay, get this in here. All right, my next talk is going to be on tools of tomorrow. So, just in case you don't know, ETC kind of sits in an intersection in between industry, actual research, and education. And about 11 years ago, I founded a grant called the R&D grant, ETC R&D grant, and we give individuals of diversity the opportunity to write and direct stories and give them full resources. So a couple of the projects we've done include shooting on Amazon Stage 15 for Fathead. We just shot at Sony Stage 7 for Europa. So we give them like massive and real resources. We'll have teams of 300 plus people on some of these projects. And it's about breaking down the research here. What we find is information without context is noise. And so it's wonderful to learn about what tools you can use, but you got to have a context for how to understand that. And so that context from the research perspective, or maybe even the studio perspective, is really, how do I implement these tools without having to go a little rogue on a $100 million film? Or TV show. Let's see what it actually does, what it does it. On the opposite side, in this particular problem, we're looking at creative intent. So how do you do creative intent on this show and actually keep it consistent? So traditionally what you're seeing out of a lot of these generative models is the model coming up with kind of this intent or this idea. So we're trying to push towards control and consistency so that you're actually directing and producing something. So let's really quickly tell you the story of ChickaBOOM. ChickaBOOM is basically about a 9-year-old girl. She wants to learn magic. Her father is a magician, and he keeps telling her to do her fundamentals, her sleight of hand, and other things. But he goes out of house one day, and basically she goes into his office, lets out the magic, and she realizes she doesn't know the magic words, so she's got to chase this cloud around. And we had a bunch of really wonderful people on this. Again, we do help foster the careers of these individuals and bring things about. So as the story evolved, we got a lot of wonderful people who have stepped on and begun to help with this story. Earlier, they talked about prompts and having up to 1,000 prompts. In this particular situation, to get the look of the key character, C. Craig Patterson had to become a poetry of prompts expert. And he's got a wonderful talk if you go back and look at the ETC archives at SIGGRAPH, where he talks about how you become a better prompt engineer and learn this new language. And he shows how taking his original prompts and then doing it a year later, then doing it a week later, how much it gives you a totally different look. So your consistency isn't there. So in this situation, it took him roughly 1,000 tries to get to his Chicka, and the Chicka, or the image of the character that he wanted to have. And what you have here is a process by which you're shortening the creative cycle. He's got to get from his mind to the people who are crafting and creating what he's imagining. And that can take months or even longer at times when you're trying to develop something like this. So at that point, we completely air gap everything. We go ahead and we turn it over to a hand artist, because some of those tools, as I mentioned earlier, potentially might not have clean data or databases. It's just to get his vision out. And now we start hand drawing, expression seats and other things. And what are they going to look like? and he wanted to make sure that she had a chipped tooth because he didn't know any of his friends at age 9 who didn't have some kind of problem with their teeth. And then we got into costume design, and so we had the wonderful Miss Ruthie Carter helping us with this. And the thing is that since he had these examples, he could share this story. He could really get her involved. She had a limited window where she could donate her time. And within a few days, she turned in 400 pages of work on what a costume and design would look like. So it's really amazing once you get to some of these individuals working on that kind of level, what they can do once you give them your vision on something. So another character that we had to try and deal with or understand is ChickaBOOM. ChickaBOOM is the cloud. This actually kind of terrified our animators, because how do you rig a cloud? You know, if we want to control that cloud or manipulate it or pull them about. So Sigrid immediately in the meeting began to go to a generative chat and find a new character. How can I create something that might actually work? By the end of that call, he had already come up with the little bunny guy. So the cloud goes in and out of being a major cloud to being kind of a Mogwai-ish little cloud. So it changes up a little bit of the dialogues, the storyboards, and the stories and the narrative. So it's kind of letting his limitations, help define and rebuild the story. So when we did this project, we bring out, or we go to a lot of industry experts, and some of these people are folks you may have heard of, a couple may not be. We done some wonderful work with ICVR. Asteria is going to be somebody on the scene that you're going to be hearing a lot from soon. It was founded by Bryn Musher. He's absolutely amazing, or their team. So what is our AI strategy? So let's look at this really quickly. Integrating scalable, consistent AI ML into animation. We are not attempting to do a purely generative film here. We're trying to look at the pipeline and improve upon it. Improve efficiency, reduce costs, force multiplier. We're not trying to be a labor displacement individual in this particular situation. We are trying to leverage the labor we have in any way possible. So we went ahead and we started off and we had the traditional pipeline. Again, everything we do is in Unreal. Unreal is the canvas by which you're going to be creating these assets and these environments in the future. So you'll be round-tripping multiple DCCs in and out for tools, because there's not going to be one tool that rules them all in any way. So we work with ICVR, and ICVR did the initial testing, and they came and went through 80 different AI tools and looked at where they fit in the pipeline. So there is obviously a lot more than 80 out there, but they did full write-ups. Some tools might be absolutely brilliant, but they don't work in a production environment, or they don't work well in this creative setting, or again, they might not be able to be used in a final or other nature. So from there, we also then dug a little deeper on at least 8 to 12, and these are just a couple that were called out for the process. So let's look at real quick creation of characters. So this character itself was created in 2 hours. Basically, you're using a Nerf technology off of a base image, and then you're throwing it in for cleanup. So traditionally, building a character, again, would take at least 16 hours, if not longer. The other character would be Arnie here. And so we had to break apart the head and the body in this particular situation to stay efficient. So what you could do with that now is we created those on a weekend. We then went to mocap on Monday, and now what they could do is they could see exactly how their characters were moving around in a potential scene and environment, which really helped change their performance, because they could be like, oh wow, okay, so that's how they're playing out. That's how they might look. And again, we did this over one weekend. Again, those characters are really quick to be made. And it's just a fun way to begin to play with how it's going to look in the scene and set. So let's look at other tools around AI. So environment creation. So we're using procedural generation here. So this particular tool is Dash. Dash allowed us to create one of the environments for Central Park in roughly 4 hours. There's many different ways you can build some of these scenes, but I'm kind of come off of learning from OSVP or in-camera VFX, in which you have to build environments quick and quicker. And we've seen a huge transition from the traditional days of Marvel-esque Mandalorian stuff where it took 9 months or longer to create VAD environments for backdrops. Now you can create them in a couple hours or less, whether you're kit bashing things together or you're using some kind of procedural workflow. The other thing that we're kind of looking at right now is using something like Kubrick. So when you have a very short shots that need limited ability to move in placement, you might be able to take a photograph and then create basically layers on top of that so that I can now even move faster on some of those scenes. One hard thing to do is keyframe as well. So although we're looking to move mocap data into what we're doing, there are situations in which you do have to do pose estimation, keyframing, and this is a long and arduous process at times. One of the tools we use here is Cascador, and it's interesting because some of the tools, I'm not sure if it's this one specifically, will say, I need to know what a 12-year-old girl with an attitude is going to walk like. And it will give you that frame, and you'll just do the key poses, and then it will fill in the movement in between those locations. And it's a pretty neat or interesting set of tools. So if anybody's ever done OSVP or built a virtual art department or assets for the walls, you're going to get into something called gray boxing. Gray boxing is how you do your primary layout for your environment build. So now we take that and we apply a depth map to those environments, and we can now do LoRa trainings on top of that. And I can produce the entire scene and how I want it to look and change things up here. Another very quick way to move forward. This is an example right now. This is an early example of video-to-video style transfer. And this doesn't have anything to do with our short, but it is just an example so you can kind of see how that gray box environment or look might look as you convert it. So some of the 2D AI character designs, Comfy UI is a great place to go with some of this. So we did that original SketchUp, and then we dropped it into Comfy UI and we manipulated and changed it. And she's talking here, you can't hear her, but she's just saying that I'm a metahuman. I am the kind of the next generation of how some of these assets might be built. And this is especially good for secondary characters or characters that might be playing not quite that primary role. In our primary role pieces, we're using a really wonderful rig generator out of San Francisco. What's it called? I can't remember the name of it right now. AI to VFX. You can go again, segment things out, identify them in the Comfy UI settings, and then begin to put some of your animations in there. Now again, that's not a perfect example, but this took about 5 minutes to create. So let's talk about the main characters right now. We started partnering up with Astera, and they showed us how to take our LoRa models to the next level. Basically training Flux, if anybody's used Flux, on these characters, right? So they went ahead and just took our graphics from our deck and built these models. So you don't need huge data sets to create some of these characters. Then they put these characters into different things like storyboard to color. So now that's what's called consistency. I've got the character, I've got the look, I got the feel I want for that individual, and it's now going into my models and how we're playing with things. So again, the cloud was one of those things that was a really hard thing in our mind to rig, right? So then all of a sudden they showed us, look, we can go ahead and use Kling to sketch out this model and then place it back into the scene. So we don't have to use traditional rigging, but we can still get that control and consistency of the look and feel we want with the cloud and then put it back in the scene. And again, this isn't the backgrounds, the actual backgrounds. They just used a quick plate or something they made up. And you can see how we can now begin to move and control everything. Here's the next model. So again, we want to see it moving through that Times Square environment. We want to plot out its directions. The director needs to be saying, this is how it's going to come about. Here it's going to go. There it's going to move to. So you can see how it's coming out before. And we run multiple simulations to find what the director really wants and feels. So here's one more real quick. And again, this is a early model. This is not our ozone rigged model that is our final model, but you can see how the face or capture now can immediately go directly to the expressions of the characters. And again, this is something that does not take much time at all. So I did want to leave you with one other thing. I know they were talking a lot about models and stuff. This right here is a flux model. This is what's coming. That's completely unreal. There's nothing that's a total model. And so the future is really going to be interesting and innovative. We ourselves are going to be doing 2 short films coming up next where we explore the boundaries of this. We're going to be looking at purely generative, and we're going to be looking at ground truth, or taking footage of individuals on a multicam shoot and then putting it into AI systems to change costumes, looks, locations, probably using some nerfs like Volinga or Kubrick or whatnot to build backgrounds and stay consistent. So, I kind of sped through all of this. I apologize. But it does leave me more time for questions, and I'm sure you'll have questions on this. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Erik. All right.
What is the correction process like? Because obviously the model is going to do something and you're going to work with it and work with it and work with it, but it's never going to really enact the vision that the creative is trying to put in there. So how do they fix it, and how difficult is that?
So no, I do actually think that you can direct it in every way. So either you're directing underlying performances through, say, again, the mocap sessions, or you're directly drawing in movement or execution of an actionable item within the scene. So you will totally be able to direct, this is what I'm looking for, this is not what I'm looking for. And that's one of the great things within the next generation that you'll be seeing coming out within the next 6 to 12 months.
And you can kind of direct with using seeds too, right? So you can get to a point and you can use that seed as an iteration point.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Any other questions? I know there are questions.
Gotta be questions here.
This is
Anil.
craziness. All right. Here we go.
Hey, great overview. Yeah, so you're saying in your workflow, at what point did you have to generate 3D models to get where you're going? Like,
so, for us, it was the point in which after he had a vision, we really wanted to air gap everything. We really wanted the animators still involved. We wanted that hand touch. So we then began to draw and kick out expression seats and say, yes, no, I like this, I don't like this, from the director. So it was just once he had decided on a look, and then it went to hand process.
Right, another one up front.
Hi. I was just wondering, do you guys run into copyright problems and issues in productions like this? Like what's the approach there? Because I know that's one of the big problems with Gen AI.
So kind of like with the last one there, absolutely not, because everything is hand drawn. So we're training our own models based on our own hand drawings at that point. So we're not running into those particular issues.
That's really cool.
Any other questions?
One in the back.
Oh, gonna make me get my steps in today, huh?
Yeah. Hello. This is kind of the unsexy question, but how are you managing all of the data that gets generated by all of these different iterations?
So that's a great question. We have several silos. We've got a great partnership with the AWS, as you might have saw in one of the slides. I'm also using Sony C for some of our primary data. We're looking at actually writing our white paper using Perplexity AI. So feeding in meeting notes, recordings of sessions, and all the data we got to help kick out a final document for understanding the process and how we did things and what we're doing. So it's kind of a multi-layered approach, but primarily it tends to live at Amazon.
All right. What other questions do we have? Knowing that the answers may change in a week.
Yeah.
Did I miss one? No. I'm curious because you work at a university, so you're around students. My perception is that students are more accepting of a lot of changing workflows, but there are a lot of younger people that are very, very anti-AI at all, like won't even touch it. And do you see students like that coming into the ETC or to universities and kind of having their minds opened by things like, well, we have our own trained model? Or I guess, is there a generational difference in how it's being accepted, or is that not a factor at all?
So it's kind of curious. On some of our prior productions, we'd get into doing these large productions and these kinds of advanced workflows, and people would say, well, that's not how my professor told me how to do it. And that's not, and you're like, really? That professor may or may not have worked in the field for 10 years because they're out there giving their knowledge to people, and that knowledge is changing. But for the most part, there are a lot of very progressive classes and students coming up, and they tend to just pick it up like a sponge so much faster. It's a little bit like a traditional, this audience probably grew up knowing how to type on typewriters, right? I think, I know I did. And as a word processor, a computer comes along, you can still use that beautiful machine. It's an amazing thing that's going to produce wonderful quality. But I got to use a computer. I'm terrible at spelling and typing fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, great. Another question here.
So you touched ever so slightly on where the data goes. Is there any thought, or is there any part of the teaching process that says you want to come back 10, 15, 20 years from now and reference what you did as a student or reference what you did as part of this development program? How are you going to make that data survive for the next 20 years?
So this is kind of a little bit of a tricky answer because we've traditionally actually had a challenge with that. How are we keeping and archiving this data? But recently, Dolby gave a grant to the university to help mature and keep that data. And so they're a funding partner in some of these projects at this point. And it's just, USC has one of the largest, archives in general in the world because they, own the Shoah Foundation, which is a huge, set of archive library resources, but they keep collections in general. So I don't know that we have a formal structured way quite yet of answering that, but we're definitely know that we're keeping all these components and that it will be put into this longer term archive for understanding.
So if I may, the next step is how you obviously I work in archiving, how you organize that data, how you make it searchable, how you find it in the future. And I'm just wondering how far down that roadmap of, which is well established in the library and archives world about how you do it both for physical instantiations and for data. If how far into your teaching process, learning process, that organizing your data for survival has come into it.
I feel like that's like an easy, a soft pitch to me, because we just published at the ETC a document on, archiving, 3D assets. So one of the problems we ran into in the OSVP world is that these VAD sets and environments and these assets and hero assets don't have a formalized archive path in the future. So, again, we're just publishing a fundamentals of, OSVP archiving and that kind of technology. And so I think that because we do a lot of papers around archive, long term. And so we definitely think that for the community, this stuff needs to be better defined. And also many of you may know from some of our prior work around C4, which is a hash identifier, which is simply 2114-2017, around consistent hash identifiers. So we really believe in that, kind of, aspect of knowledge.
All right. Another question over here. Good question on archiving. When I'm blowing through iterations, suddenly I have like 9,000 random named files on my system. There
Hey,
you go.
Ben.
Hey, I have a question. When it comes to working with directors specifically, how much do you want and how much do you think they should be involved in technical elements in a way that this is not overwhelming and in some way also being a handicap for them in terms of limiting their creativity because they're so busy with the tech itself?
So I think that's one of the biggest epiphanies we've had on our upcoming film is how do you define what you're expecting from a writer-director and technology-wise or not? And I think it's about understanding how to get their vision out and how to say yes or no to what the technologist is bringing with them. And I heard a famous story about, I won't name the director, and a very famous kind of CTO-ish person on a project. And the CTO guy said, I'm working all night to create this absolutely beautiful shot. And all of a sudden I show up and the director's like, no, the next morning, it's too realistic or it's too this or that. That's not my vision. So I think that you really need to define who the person is and what their role is. If they're a creative person, I don't think that they should be spending all night polishing or working in Comfy or Flux or some other model thing. I think that you just need to say, this is my role, and so that they can stick to their scope.
All right. I think we have time for one more.
Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. Prompt engineering seems to be a difficult task, and you need a lot of tries to get the best results. Do you think in the future there will be a kind of interactive way to generate prompts, or even use AI to generate the prompts?
So I think it's a little bit, again, like poetry. I mean, every one of us here, I would assume, can all write and do things, but there are only certain people who get the real language and that of poetry or writing on a novelistic format. So those people are still going to stand out. The people who understand that language or that poetry of prompts are going to stand up and shine in some way. Will there be another medium? Maybe, possibly. But this stuff is a lot more sophisticated than a few words on paper, as I'm sure you understand. I mean, 371 to get that character, there is a lot more going in, and it's fascinating when you dig down.
All right. Well, we're at time now. Thank you so much, Erik.